Over to the next one. Here we go. Yeah, it's just been kind of going like this one.
All right, so this one is broadcasting right now, so you're ready to go.
Yeah. Huh? The audio isn't working.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Kelly Jaakkola. I'm the Director of Research for Dolphin Research Center, or DRC, in Florida Keys. And I want to start by introducing you, if I can get the tech going, to a really cool dolphin that I know named Tanner. Now, I've known Tanner since he was born at DRC in 2002. And for the last about 18 years, he and the other dolphins at DRC have been helping me to figure out how a dolphin's mind works. So that's what I want to start with today by telling you a little bit about our studies on cognition and communication. After that, we'll talk about conservation threats to wild dolphins and the role that marine mammal facilities play in conservation issues. And then we'll end with talking about dolphin well-being in facilities. That is, how do we know that the dolphins in facilities are doing okay? And how do we make sure that they are? So if you guys have questions, go ahead and type them in, and I should be able to see them. I think it'll probably work best if we do it in two sections. So after I finish talking about cognition and communication, I'll take a few questions on that. And then at the end, we'll take remaining questions on that, or conservation, well-being, and so on. Okay, so let's start with cognition. Now, here's Tanner again. And when we talk about Tanner's cognition or any animal's cognition, what we're talking about is what's going on inside their mind. So thinking, learning, problem solving, that sort of thing. But the problem is, I can't see his mind. So how do you study it? Well, you have to set up a problem solving sort of situation where what you do is you present him with situations, problems, or puzzles, something that's going to go into his mind, and then you see what comes out the other side, a behavior, an answer, a response. So you know what went into his mind, you know what comes out, and from there you can infer the cognitive processes that were going on. And you can study cognition like this in any animal, whether it's a dolphin, or a dog, or a bird, or a bee, or a person. And when you do, you're going to get different answers because, of course, all minds are not the same. And that's a really important point to keep in mind, especially when we bring human minds into the mix. Because, of course, we're really used to our own minds. And so it's tempting and easy to think that animal minds, in this case, dolphin minds, are just like ours. But really, they're not. That's really the wrong way to think about it. And I'm going to show you why. So what you're looking at here is a very simplified evolutionary tree. On the bottom, you've got species that are alive today. And then as you go up, you go back in time. So ancestors, ancestors, and ancestors. And what I want you to notice is that the last time dolphins and humans shared a common ancestor was 90 to 95 million years ago, which is, of course, a really long time ago. And since that time, we've branched off into different environments and evolved in different environments. So whereas the ancestors of humans evolved first in the jungles and then in the savannas, the ancestors of dolphins went back to the sea. And these two different evolutionary pathways have led to profound differences between us. Some of them obvious and some of them maybe not so obvious. So let's talk about them. First, of course, we have really different body plans. Where humans have all of these gangly moving pieces, dolphins are torpedo-shaped, which means we interact with the world differently. So we can pick things up with our hands. They don't have hands. We also perceive the world differently. So in humans, our eyes are on the front of our heads. For dolphins, their eyes are on the side, which means the world literally looks different to us. We've also got other different senses. So dolphins have echolocation, a kind of biological sonar that lets them see with sound. We don't have that, but we have smell, and they don't. The point being that the way that we experience and interface with the world is different. We've also evolved different neuroanatomies, so brains. So for example, the outer layer, which is called the cerebral cortex, that's where the thinking, learning, cognition takes place. In dolphins, the brain on the left, their cerebral cortex is actually bigger than ours, with a lot more folding, but it's also thinner, with different cell types and arrangements of cell types. So in other words, their wiring is different. Also, the brain areas are arranged differently. So in humans, the visual area where the visual information comes in is in the back, and the auditory area is on the side. And in between, we've got brain space, what we call association cortex, to allow those areas to talk to each other. In dolphins, their visual area and their auditory area are right up next to each other with no need of association cortex for those areas to talk to each other. So in other words, our brains are different, which means our minds work differently, both in terms of the information that gets in and how it's processed once it gets there. So what we're trying to figure out is, what is a dolphin's mind like? So to give you a flavor of that, I'm going to talk about 3 different studies on cognition and communication. First, we're going to talk about physical reasoning. Then we're going to talk a little bit about communication, and finally, imitation. So first up, physical reasoning. Now the question here is, can a dolphin reason about an object that it can no longer see? So once an object goes out of sight, can it still keep it in mind and figure out what's happening with it? Humans do this all the time. Suppose, for example, you see me put a ball into a cup, right? Now, do you know where the ball is? Of course you do. Even though you can't see it, you know that it's in the cup, not a problem. Now, what if I move the cup? Now do you know where the ball is? Well, of course you do. But what I need you to realize is the only reason that you know is because you reasoned about it. You didn't actually see the ball move. You saw the cup move. But you could reason, I know the ball's in the cup. If the cup moves, the ball has to move with it. And the question we were interested in is, can dolphins do this same kind of reasoning? So to test this, we started with a game, which is find the stuffed alligator. Now, that may seem pretty odd. Why would you use an alligator of all things? Well, we could have used any object, but the stuffed alligator was the favorite toy of the first dolphin that we tested. So that's what we used. And the game was very simple. It was no matter where the trainer put the alligator on the dock, the dolphin needed to touch it. And if they put it on top of a bucket, then the dolphin was supposed to touch the bucket. And importantly, during training, that alligator never completely disappeared into the bucket. The dolphin could always see it. But then in testing, now we put the alligator all the way in one of the buckets. And the question is, when that object disappears from sight, does the dolphin still know where it is? Looks like this. So she shows him the alligator, he's watching, she puts lids on and goes and gets another experimenter. And let me stop and explain that. It was very important that the person who was asking the question didn't actually know the answer. That way she wasn't able to unintentionally give the dolphin any sort of body cues or anything like that. So we had one person who hid the object, and then a different person would come up and ask, where is it? And he picks a bucket, and he picks the right bucket. Yes, dolphins absolutely could keep track of where an object had disappeared. But now let's make it harder. What about where you have to infer object movement from container movement, like when I move the cup? Now what happens? So again, starts off the same. She puts the alligator all the way into the bucket. The dolphin's watching. She moves the bucket. The dolphin is absolutely watching that. But the question is, does he know that when that container moved, the alligator went with it? Does he know where the alligator is? Where is it? And the answer is no. He picks the wrong bucket. Dolphins, surprisingly to us, shockingly to us, were really bad at this. They did not know that the object moved with the container. So just to recap, dolphins absolutely can remember where an object was if they saw it disappear somewhere. That's not a problem. The problem is in inferring object movement. So notice how different this is from humans, right? For you guys, it was a no-brainer. If a container moves, then the object inside moves with it. But this idea totally stumped the dolphins. They couldn't do it. Okay, now I'm going to talk about a study on dolphin communication. But to do that, first I need to give you a crash course in dolphin communication in general. So here goes. Bottlenose dolphins make 3 basic different types of sounds. First are their clicks that they use for echolocation. It sounds kind of like a creaking door. Next are what we call burst pulse sounds. These are sounds like bleats and blats and growls that seem to carry a motion type of information. And then finally are narrowband whistles. And dolphins do something really pretty interesting with whistles. So that's what I want to talk about today. Now, when we analyze whistles, we use something called a spectrogram. And you can think of it sort of like a graph of sound. So on the y-axis is the frequency, how high or how low pitched a sound is. And then on the x-axis is time. So what you're looking at here is a spectrogram of a dolphin whistle. And you'll see that it's going to go up and then down and then up and then down. And if I have sound, I'm going to try to play this for you. It happens quickly. Okay, so that's what one dolphin whistle sounds like. But if you put a hydrophone in with a group of dolphins, you're going to hear a lot of different kinds of whistles. However, it is not the case that all of the dolphins in the group are typically making all of those whistles, like it would be if it were words in a language. That's not what they're doing. Instead, each individual dolphin has their own individual whistle that they tend to make over and over. So that first whistle might come up from a dolphin named Marina, second whistle might be Flagler, third might be Lulu, and on and on. Each dolphin has their own whistle that they make most of the time, and sometimes they'll also make another dolphin's whistle. So what scientists think is that these individual whistles that we call signature whistles are vocal labels, kind of like names in the sense that they refer to particular individual dolphins and allow them to keep in touch with individual dolphins. Now, they're not exactly like names, but we'll get to that in just a minute. Okay, so if dolphins are using signature whistles to keep in contact with specific others and find specific others, one of the most important instances of that has to be to allow moms and calves to keep in contact and to find each other again once they're apart. But how does that work? So suppose you have a mom and a calf and they're swimming separately, each doing their own thing. What does the mom do when she wants her calf to come back? Now, to test that, you have to set up a situation where you know the dolphin mom wants her calf to come back. That's not a situation you can set up in the wild. However, in a marine mammal facility, we can just ask her. So that's what we did. We started with a game that our dolphins already know, which is, hey, go get this object. It looks like this. So she asks Marina to go get the object. And the spectrogram of what's happening is down at the bottom here. Now, what you notice is that there are no whistles. Right? Marina just goes and she gets her again and she brings it back. Awesome. So then in the actual study, we did this at a time where Marina had a calf, a 4-month-old calf named Windley. And so what we would do is during a training session, Windley would be off doing her own thing, and the trainer would look for instances when Windley's somewhere on the other side of the lagoon, and then she would ask Marina, hey, instead of go get the object, go get your baby. And I'm going to show you this, and again, the spectrogram's at the bottom. So the baby whistles. Again, as she's going to hopefully find bring back Windley. So let's see if they come back. And yes, they do. So notice that unlike when she went to get an object, when she went to get her calf, she whistled. She called to her calf. But interestingly, what did she whistle? She whistled her own signature whistle, not the calf's whistle, her whistle. So what do dolphin moms do when they want their calves to come back? They make their own signature whistle. And again, notice how different this is from what humans do. When you were a kid, or if you're a kid now, I guarantee you that if your mom wanted you to come, they did not stand in the middle of a room and call their own name. That would be bizarre for us, but it's essentially what the dolphins do. Okay, last study I want to talk about, last cognition study, is imitation. And so first I want to talk a little bit about imitation in humans, because humans imitate all the time. We imitate to learn, we imitate to fit in, we imitate just because we can, and we're really good at it. And because imitation is such an important part of our psyche, it sometimes surprises people to learn that imitation is not at all widespread in the animal kingdom. Most animals do not imitate specific behaviors. But what about dolphins? Dolphins actually do imitate, right? So we know this from previous studies that showed that they could copy both motor behaviors and sounds. So for our study, we wanted to push that a little and see, okay, well, how good are they at imitation? And can they be flexible with it? So what we asked is, can dolphins imitate blindfolded? In other words, can they figure out how to imitate a behavior that they can't even see? Well, how do you do that? Again, we started with a game that our dolphins already knew. This is an imitation game called Do As I Do. And in this game, there are 2 different dolphins involved. One dolphin is the model. It's his job to do whatever behaviors his trainer asks him to do. And then there's the imitator, and it's his job to copy whatever behaviors the model does, right? Our dolphins already knew how to play this, but then we changed the rules a little bit by blindfolding the imitator. Well, how do you blindfold a dolphin? Use these soft latex eye cups. They're kind of like suction cups that fit over the dolphin's eyes. Now, If the dolphin wants to, he could just blink and those eye cups will come right off. But the dolphin that that was in this study, Tanner, who I introduced you to earlier, he liked playing this game and he wore the eye cups just fine. So here's what this looked like. You see that he starts off with one eye cup all the way down. She gives him the sign to imitate with the other eye cup on. And at this point, he can't see. The other dolphin gets a signal for bobs up and down. And Tanner also bobs up and down. All right, so let's see it again. Imitation, this time of swim like a shark. So that means move your tail back and forth instead of up and down. Sometimes we had a person. I want you to watch what Tanner does. Right? There. But yes, he could do it. He could imitate whether it was a dolphin in the water or a person in the water. There was no problem with that. He absolutely could figure out how to imitate somebody blindfolded. And he did it in a flexible kind of way, which means the way that he did it is sometimes he would do it based on the sound of the behavior. So for example, if I asked everybody out there to shut their eyes and I said, hey, imitate this. Presumably you could do it because you recognize what hands clapping sounds like. But sometimes when we had a person in the water, the sound was different, right? Because a person doing the behavior is going to sound different than a dolphin doing the behavior. And in that case, he changed strategies and instead he echolocated. And that was what I was pointing out to you. He turns to the model and he buzzes at them. He echolocates so he can see the behavior with sound. They were able to figure it out. Okay, now I just want to take just a minute to talk about research in the media. And this is because when we did this study, it got a lot of media attention. And our boy Tanner had his accomplishment broadcast all over the world, which is awesome. You definitely want your research to be seen by people. So it was really a lot of fun that the media thought this study was cool and broadcast it. That part's great. However, you also need to be careful. Now, I just showed you guys what this study was actually about, so you know what it really was. Now I want to show you just a few of the headlines that we saw. First, do blindfolded dolphins use echolocation to see? Well, yes, they do, but that wasn't what our study was about. That was something we've known for 50 years, so we can't take credit for that. Blindfolded dolphins can detect and imitate each other's behavior using sixth sense. After this particular headline came out, we got questions about our psychic dolphins, which, as far as we know, we don't have. And my favorite, study explores how blindfolded dolphins can see. Does Flipper have superpowers? Scientists say maybe. Now, as a scientist in question, I can tell you that nobody ever asked me if our dolphins have superpowers. And if they did, I would not have said maybe. So the point I want to stress for you guys, that I want you to understand, is that once a piece of research hits the media, the scientists involved have no say over what is said about it. People can say anything they want to, which is why it's super important when you see things in the media to fact check the media stories. You know, media and social media can be great. They can spread information super quickly, which is awesome, but they also spread misinformation super quickly, which is not nearly as awesome. So you can sort of put the brakes on that a little bit by fact checking the media stories. All right, so we've talked about 3 different cognition studies. First, in the study of physical reasoning, the dolphins were really bad at that. They couldn't keep track of objects that were moving in containers. In the study on communication, we saw that a dolphin mom will call to her calf when she wants it to come, but she does it in a different way than people do. With people, we would call the child's name. Instead, the dolphins were making their own signature whistle. And then in imitation, they were rock stars. So not only could they imitate, but they could imitate in a problem-solving kind of way to figure out how to imitate behaviors that they couldn't even see. Okay, so let me just take, if there are any questions on cognition, I'll ask a couple, or answer a couple of those before we move on. Okay, so first, can he imitate a behavior that he had not previously been trained to do, an unknown behavior? Awesome question. And we've talked about this a lot. The problem we haven't figured out a way for us to do this study yet, though, because once our dolphins learn a behavior, they all seem to know the behavior, which might actually be then answering your question, right? So we don't have a lot of behaviors that one dolphin knows that another dolphin doesn't know. So we haven't been able to have enough behaviors that we could test this on. Okay, another question here. What's your favorite study? Usually my favorite study is whatever study we're doing at the time. And whatever studies the dolphins find exciting. So for a while, blindfolded imitation was my favorite study because Tanner got it like that. He got it so quickly and he was so good at it that it was very surprising. Since then, we've also recently done a study that I didn't talk about on cooperation, where we have two different dolphins cooperating to do a particular task. And that study I love because the dolphins who do it get really jazzed about it. They get really excited and they love it. And so it's fun to see when the dolphins like figuring things out. Okay, let me see. I will take one more right now, and then I'm not putting these away. I'm just going to wait till later because I want to make sure I get through past everything. All right, let me just go with, at what age do you start to see a calf develop its own signature whistle? So I'm going to guess that the person there knows something about signature whistles because you said develops its own signature whistle. So as far as we can tell, dolphin calves do develop their own signature whistle from sounds they hear in the environment, and it varies from calf to calf. They used to say sometime within the first year, but really a year would be an outlier. Usually within the first few months, you start to see them gel onto a particular signature contour. All right. I'm going to keep these questions here, but I want to move on so that I can make sure we finish, and then we'll come back and answer other questions. So next, I want to talk about conservation threats to wild dolphins and the role that marine mammal facilities play in conservation issues. And I want to start with looking at threats to wild dolphins. What sorts of conservation challenges or threats are wild dolphins facing these days? Well, in some parts of the world, dolphins are still hunted and killed. So obviously that's a big one. Something that a lot of people don't really understand though is there's also dolphin harassment. And what I mean by harassing dolphins is when you get close enough to a wild dolphin that you're impacting their behavior. Now in the US, this is illegal. But even if it weren't illegal, it would be dangerous for the dolphins. And that's because it's interfering with important behaviors, such as foraging and breeding and parenting. And sometimes people even want to feed wild dolphins. And you know, I understand. I'm sure that they think they're doing a good thing. They think they're helping the dolphins out, but they're not. What they're really doing is teaching the dolphins to approach boats because that's where the food is. And the problem is when dolphins approach boats, dolphins get hit by boat propellers, right? Which can severely injure or kill them. So please, please don't feed wild dolphins. There are also big environmental disasters like oil spills. So about 10 years ago, we had the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, which led to what we call an unusual mortality event, which means a lot of animals died because of that. We also have marine debris. This is trash that makes its way to the ocean where animals can get entangled in it and can ingest things that aren't food that their bodies can't handle. And there's noise pollution. So these are loud noises from ships, from military sonar, from oil and gas exploration. And the problem is that dolphins are highly acoustic animals. Sound is important to them. And so loud noises interfere with their behavior and can physically damage their ears. And the underlying thread to all of these is people. Humans are the biggest threat to wild dolphins, whether directly through harassing and killing them, or indirectly through the many human practices that impact the environment that these animals live in. And because people are the problem, we need to find ways for people to be the solution. And we need to use every strategy that we possibly can. So next I want to talk about two roles that marine mammal facilities play in this endeavor. Oops, sorry. First, they provide opportunities for research and expertise with marine mammals in a way that's not possible to get in the wild. And second, they provide a method for connecting the public to the relevant issues. And let me explain what I mean. First, research and expertise that's impossible to achieve in the wild. You know, before we had dolphins in facilities, we didn't know the basics about them. So how do they even work? For example, the fact that they have echolocation, that biological sonar that lets them see the sound. That was discovered in a marine mammal facility because the scientists had to have the animals close in order to design studies to show that in the absence of sight, for example, when you temporarily blindfold them, they can still navigate, they can still find food, they can still find targets, etc., because they have the sense of echolocation. Pregnancy and birth. Before we had dolphins in facilities, we didn't know basic information like how long is a dolphin pregnancy? How is a baby dolphin born? These are really difficult things to see in the wild. But in a marine mammal facility, you can watch it happen. That's a photograph of one of our dolphins giving birth, and you can see the baby dolphin's tail flukes. Not only that, but we were able to watch the mom during pregnancy. We could track how she gained weight. We could even use ultrasound to see the calf growing inside the mother during pregnancy. Hearing range. Once you have the animals close, you can give them hearing tests. So now we know what ranges of sounds they can hear, which also tells us what ranges of sounds in the ocean can affect them. Lung physiology. This is a study out of Dolphin Quest Oahu looking at dolphin lung function. So what they do is they ask the dolphin to breathe into that device you see there in different situations, either at rest or after a lot of exercise. And from that, they can measure how quickly the air is going in and out of the lungs and what the gas composition of the breath is and so forth to figure out how dolphin respiration works. And then cognition. We've talked a lot about cognition, so I'm not going to go into specifics here, other than to say that to do testing on how dolphins think and learn, you have to have them up close. You have to be able to present them with situations and puzzles with all the necessary scientific controls, consistency, and repetition that you just can't get in the wild. And by the way, that photograph there is of another cognition study that we didn't talk about that looked at whether or not dolphins can understand the numerical concept of less. So in this case, whether they could pick the board that had the fewer number of dots, and yes, they could. All right, so research in marine mammal facilities have also developed ways of assessing and improving the health of these animals. This includes developing assessment equipment and techniques. So a minute ago, I mentioned ultrasound. This is what that looks like. We ask the dolphin to lie still near the dock, and then we have a portable ultrasound machine that allows us to image what's going on inside of them. Scientists have also developed ways of assessing an animal's hearing by measuring their brain waves. Now, the first hearing tests I told you about used dolphins that were trained to respond to particular tones in the same way that you might take a hearing test at a doctor's office. But since then, recently, scientists have figured out a way to measure the dolphin's brain waves as they're taking those tests. So now they can figure out if the dolphin can hear a sound just by looking at the brain response, which means we can now test animals who don't know how to take a hearing test. We've also come to understand physiological and behavioral baselines and deviations from those baselines. So this includes things like what are a dolphin's nutritional requirements? What's a dolphin's blood chemistry when they're sick versus when they're healthy? How do you tell if a dolphin is sick? And how do you treat those illnesses? And once you have that information and those techniques, you can also use it to assess and treat stranded animals in order to immediately know, for example, whether an animal, a stranded animal, is having underlying respiratory issues or hearing problems so that then we can then treat them appropriately. Okay, so research in marine mammal facility gives us a lot of information that you can't get from the wild. And that includes most of what we know about dolphin physiology, healthcare, perception, cognition, and it also includes developing techniques and equipment to assess these animals, which we can then use to assess animals in the wild. And this helps scientists research and interpret the behavior of wild animals, and it forms the basis of conservation practices. However, I want to be clear, I am not at all claiming that research in facilities is somehow better than research in the wild, or that one of them is a better alternative than the other. No, that's just not it. We need both, right? There are some questions that can only be researched in the field. And there are other questions where you need the animals up close. And these two different kinds of research work together and inform each other to give us a full picture of what dolphins are like. Okay, so the second role that marine mammal facilities play is they provide a situation where the public can directly experience marine mammals, where they can learn about them and they can learn about the challenges they face in the wild, and they can make the emotional connections necessary to inspire conservation. And this is really important. So any sort of conservation efforts that are going to impact these animals are eventually going to boil down to the millions upon millions of decisions of everyday men, women, and children. So how do you impact that? Well, we know that when you bring people into a facility like ours and you give them up-close experiences with animals, they start to form a connection and they start to care. And it is that moment of connection, that moment of caring, that's a start of conservation mindedness. It is not enough to just give people information. Information is important, but people have to care enough to actually go out and do something with that information. And studies have shown that experiences with animals in zoos and aquariums positively impact visitors' conservation-related attitudes, knowledge, and behaviors. Okay, so big picture. Humans are the problem and need to be the solution. And marine mammal facilities play two key roles in addressing that problem. However, of course, we also want to look out for the animals that are in these facilities, right? No matter what sort of benefits we're talking about, whether it's to research or conservation or education, no matter how great those benefits are, we need to carefully weigh them against the well-being of the animals in these facilities. So let's talk about that. How are the dolphins in facilities doing? What do the data actually show? So I want to just take a minute and give you guys a little bit of background about the place where I work so you'll understand where I'm coming from. I work at a nonprofit marine mammal facility in the Florida Keys called Dolphin Research Center, or DRC. We have 26 dolphins that live at DRC, ranging in age from 4 to 46. One of those dolphins was collected from the wild a number of decades ago when people still did that. 22 of those animals were born at DRC. Or one of those 22 was born at another facility and transferred to DRC. And then 3 of them were rescued from really bad situations in the wild when they were just little babies. So specifically, Jax here, as you can see, was the victim of a shark attack that apparently left his mother dead. Louis was one of the victims of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill that I mentioned a minute ago. And he was in really bad shape when he stranded. He was given at the time a 5% chance that he would even survive. But not only has he survived, he's doing great. And then there's Summer, who's actually a different species. Summer is a spotted dolphin, a Stenella, and she was found in critical condition on a beach when she was just a little tiny baby with no mother around and too young to survive on her own. So each of those dolphins individually came to DRC, where they're now doing great. So at Dolphin Research Center, our dolphins participate in a number of different types of training sessions throughout the day. Cognition research, husbandry, and medical kinds of sessions where they're focused on high energy behaviors to give the dolphins a lot of physical exercise, and interactive programs with our guests. And no matter what kind of session we're doing, we're talking about it. So we have narrators out there who are explaining to people, hey, this is what you're seeing, this is what's going on, and or we have trainers or other staff members who are talking to our guests and answering questions. Okay, so that's DRC. I also want to talk just a little bit about what life is like in marine mammal facilities in general. And the first thing I want you to know is that in the United States, the vast majority of dolphins that are in marine mammal facilities were born in marine mammal facilities. There have been no wild collections in US waters since 1989. The animals live in social groups, they get a lot of physical and mental stimulation, and great medical care, which all sounds great, right? But if it's also great, then what about some of these concerns you sometimes hear from people who are worried about what they think life is like in these facilities? So let's talk about that. Are the dolphins in marine mammal facilities okay or not? What do the data actually show? So the first question I want us to talk about is how long dolphins live. Do they live longer in marine mammal facilities or do they live longer in the wild? And the way that we can get at that is by looking at something called mortality rate. Now, mortality rate is the percent of a population that dies each year. So a high mortality rate is bad. That means a lot of animals are dying, which means they're not living as long. Low mortality rate is good. Not as many animals dying means they're living longer. And what we can do is we can compare mortality rate in facilities versus in the wild. So let's start with the wild. These purple bars here are the mortality rates for the 3 wild populations for which we have that information. And the first thing I want you to realize and see is that the wild is not one thing. There are some populations that are doing really well with low mortality rates. And then there are other populations where the mortality rates are much higher. But for today, I just want to focus on the best case scenario. And that's for 2 reasons. First of all, that particular population is a wild population of dolphins in Sarasota, Florida, who have been well studied for several decades. So we're sure that the data are good and solid. Second, of course, we want to set the bar high. When we're making comparisons, we want to compare with the best situation there is. So let's do that. So these green bars here are the mortality rates for bottlenose dolphins in US facilities over the last several decades. And what you can see is 40 to 50 years ago, that's that first green bar, the mortality rate in facilities was not as good as the best case scenario in the wild. This was at a time when almost all of the dolphins were collected from the wild, which is presumably a really stressful process for them to go through. And it was happening at a time before we knew as much about how to take care of these animals. It was before we had learned all of those things that we were talking about earlier. So since that time, mortality rate has gotten progressively better. Until today, the mortality rate in US facilities is at least as good as the best case scenario in the wild. So dolphins in US facilities today are living as long or longer than wild dolphins. Okay, next potential criticism I want to address is sometimes you'll hear people say something like, oh, you're forcing the dolphins to work all day and you should retire them and not force them to work. Okay, so let's unpack that. What actually happens during dolphin training sessions and shows? First, yes, it is true that dolphins do participate in training sessions at several points during the day with their trainer. That part's true. However, while some people want to characterize that as work with an apparently negative connotation, from an animal caretaking perspective, we know that positive reinforcement training sessions, in other words, the kind of training that's done with dolphins, actually adds to an animal's well-being, not detracts from it. So it provides physical stimulation, mental stimulation, social stimulation, and studies have shown that this type of training positively impacts an animal's welfare. Which sounds good, unless you think that the dolphins are somehow being forced to participate in these sessions. But they're not. The animals have a choice. The dolphins always have a choice whether they want to participate. The trainers try to make the sessions fun so that the dolphins will want to participate, but any dolphin can at any point refuse a particular behavior or swim away. And when they do, nothing bad happens. Those animals still get all of their required food regardless of what they choose to participate in or not participate in on a given day. So they're also not forced, which leaves us with this question of time. So is it the case that we are asking our dolphins to do things all day? Fortunately, this is a question we can answer. It's a data question. How long do we ask for their attention each day? So we did a study. And what we did, very simple, every time a trainer went down on the dock to do a session with a dolphin, we timed it. And we timed it for every session, for every dolphin over multiple days. And what we found is that on average, we were asking each of our dolphins to pay attention to us for an hour and a half a day. An hour and a half out of 24 hours a day, which is of course a far cry from all day. All right, and finally, sometimes you'll hear people say, you know, dolphins are too intelligent to do well in a zoological setting. Now, given my area of research, this is obviously an issue that's near and dear to my heart. So what's up with that? Well, first, as a scientist, I need to correct this misimpression that intelligence is a single thing that animals have either more or less of. You'll notice that when we were talking about the dolphin mind, you never heard me say the word intelligence. The word I used was cognition. And this is because this question of how intelligent an animal is as one single measure is actually impossible to answer. Animals have evolved in different environments. Their brains have evolved to solve different problems. There is no one overall measure of intelligence that makes any sense at all. So, to study this question scientifically, we need to tweak it a little. Instead of asking how intelligent are they, we ask how are they intelligent? And what this does is it allows us to look at more specific skills and capacities like number concepts, memory, imitation, problem solving, and so on. The kinds of things that we can compare across animals. And when we do that, what we find is, as we showed earlier, there are some areas where dolphins are rock stars, where their cognitive processes are seem to be really sophisticated. But there are other areas where their cognitive processes are not nearly as sophisticated as you might think. Okay. Now, having said that, it is also true that when you look across the animal kingdom, across a variety of areas, dolphins' cognitive skills seem to be more sophisticated than a lot of other animals. However, there is no evidence that this means that they would do more poorly in a zoological setting, as long as you take care of their psychological needs. So of course you need to do that. Of course you need to pay attention and take care of their psychological needs just as much as their physical needs. And we do. So I just want to show you a few ways in which that happens. First, there are their training sessions, right? Now we've already talked about cognitive research. To us, it's research. To them, it's thinking games, it's problem solving, it's figuring things out, it's mental stimulation. However, there are other training sessions that aren't cognitive research are also mental stimulation. The trainers are asking them to learn things, to cooperate with other dolphins, to experience something new, to try something new. This is mental stimulation just as much as it's physical stimulation. Right, so that's sessions. In between sessions, in addition to hanging out with their buddies, which, just to be clear, dolphins absolutely need to do. They're social animals, they need social interaction. But in addition to that, we also do something that's called environmental enrichment. Now, what that means is we add things to their environment to give them new experiences, to enrich their experiences. It might be a new toy for them to play with, it might be a new situation for them to experience, and sometimes facilities will even build more complicated enrichment devices, like in that picture you see at the bottom there. That is an enrichment device that we have used in the past called our Dolphin Entertainment System, or DESP. And what it is when it was in the water, there were two underwater paddles that the dolphins could press. And depending on the order in which they pressed them, different things happened. So it might drop out some ice, or it might blow some bubbles, or as in the picture there, it might shoot out some water. And so this gave the dolphins something to explore. All right. And third, sometimes within our regular training sessions, we do thinking games or concept behaviors where we're specifically asking the dolphins to exercise their minds, to create, to remember, to problem solve. So I want to show you just a few of those. First, combo and repeat. Now, what we mean by combo is put a couple of different behaviors together at the same time that you didn't learn together. Kind of like if I asked you guys to rub your stomach and pat your head at the same time. So it looks like this. You have to talk, and to dance at the same time, and to dive at the same time. Back. So you have to do all of those three things, figure out how to put them together, and now you have to, okay, remember, you just put all those three things together, remember it, and repeat it. All right, innovate. In this, what you're going to see is the trainer is going to give the same signal several times, and what the dolphin is supposed to do is come up with a different behavior each time. So they have to do something new, which means they're remembering doing something new. So, take the signal, one thing with her tail. Now notice she's going to get the exact same signal, but she has to do something different. Now she has to remember those two things and do yet a third thing. She does. Awesome. Match to sample. So in this game, there are three objects. The one in the middle is the sample, and then the one on the sides, they're supposed to pick which one matches the sample. It looks like this.
Published articles that we have out there where you may be able to find them and what they're about. As you see there.
All right, and finally find same, sort of like match to sample, except using objects that are already in the room to show them. It's like, hey, that's something that okay, so that's just a few of the ways that we exercise our dolphin minds, take care of their psychological needs. All right, so to end, I want to leave you with 4 key ideas. If you remember nothing else about anything I've said, remember these 4 things. First of all, humans are the biggest threat to wild dolphins. So if we want to conserve dolphins, we need to get people to recognize that and to take steps to mitigate the problems. Second, marine mammal facilities provide 2 key roles for conservation. They provide opportunities for research that we can't get in the wild, and they provide a forum for public education and connection with animals that leads to conservation. And they actually also provide a 3rd role as well, which is they are directly involved in rescue efforts and in providing a forever home to animals who are victims of our environmental disasters, like Louis here. 3rd, dolphins thrive in accredited marine mammal facilities. And by using the word accredited, I mean to highlight facilities who have a demonstrated record and a demonstrated high standards of animal welfare and animal care. I am not claiming that dolphins do well in every situation. Of course they don't. Nobody does. People don't, horses don't, dogs don't. You have to pay attention to their needs, their physical needs, social needs, psychological needs. You have to pay attention and take care of those. And when you do, like in accredited marine mammal facilities, dolphins do great. In fact, dolphins are one of the most successful animals in zoological facilities. Okay, and 4th, even though I've talked mainly about dolphins and facilities, I want to leave you with a big picture, higher level thought, which is that human choices impact every animal on this planet. Everyone. There is not an animal that is out of our reach. We're the ones who decide whether or not to harass animals. We're the ones who decide whether or not to pollute their environment. We're the ones who decide whether or not to take their habitats. We're already responsible for that. And it's time we started taking that responsibility seriously. Okay, so as I take final questions, I just want to leave up a bunch of resources for you all to look at. If you're interested in conservation, you can go to DRC's website. We have information on threats to wild dolphins and what you can do. If you are interested in our research, you can again go to our website and read about it, or you know what, even better, just come see it. We do all of our research in front of the public and we love talking about it. So if you can make it down to the Keys, come see our research, come talk to us about dolphins, conservation, research, and so forth. And if your school budget doesn't allow you to bring a whole class down to the Keys, then you also have the option of distance learning. So instead of an actual field trip, you could do a virtual field trip. Or if you can't make it to the Keys, another option is, of course, there are other great facilities in the world. And so if you want to find one of those, my suggestion would be to go to the website of the Alliance of Marine Mammal Parks and Aquariums, which I've listed there. For dolphins in particular, the Alliance is probably the most important accrediting body, so with really high standards, and so you'll be able to find good facilities there. All right, let me just take a real quick drink. And then let's dive back into the questions, if I can get them open here. Wow, whole bunch. Okay, let's see what we've got. Can we visit your facility? Yes, absolutely. I mentioned that. Do you have a favorite dolphin that you like to work with? Oh, wait, am I changing things? Sorry about that. I'm killing things here. Let me try that again. Go to slide. Resources. We'll try to do this without touching anything. What was the question? Do you have a favorite dolphin that you like to work with? No, I don't. Like I kind of said before, it sort of depends on the study. I will tell you that there are some dolphins that like cognitive research more than others, just like there are people that like, you know, doing math tests or doing improv or doing whatever it is, dolphins also have different dolphinalities. And so there are some dolphins who really get jazzed about thinking and learning new things. There are other dolphins that get a little bit stressed out about that and don't want to try new things. And so if I'm being honest, I would say that the dolphins who get excited about cognitive research, which is what I'm excited about, I find that fun. But there's more than one of those that do that. Okay. Will the references be available? You can go to any of the studies that I talked about. The references are on our Dolphin Research Center's website. So you can just go there and we have a section about our research where the references are listed. And yes, absolutely, you can find those there. All right. Let's see. Are dolphins able to communicate to other marine animals that also use echolocation, like, for example, beluga whales? The honest answer is I have no idea, except to say that, of course, depends on what you mean by communicate. And we didn't get into the difference between communication and language, but certainly animals, including dolphins, including people, can communicate across species. So if I said, hey, can you communicate with your dog? Of course you can communicate with your dog. But can you have a conversation in the same way that you and I could have a conversation? No, you can't. So can animals communicate with different species? Yes, absolutely they can. Do they understand what the signals mean? That's harder to answer, and I don't know. Another question, do they remember the studies years later? There haven't been a lot of studies looking at that, but there have been a couple where the answer is yes, that dolphins can have really long memories. And so you will see that dolphins, when you played a game with them, years later, they will absolutely play that same game. Or there have been studies that show that with signature whistles, that dolphins will remember the signature whistles of someone who they shared a pool with, you know, years ago, I believe up to 20 years ago. So yes, dolphins do have very long-term memories. All right. How do you know if a dolphin is mad, sad, etc.? Again, just like with any animal, any social animal has a way of conveying its emotions to other animals. And so I could ask you the same thing again about dogs or cats. And so with dolphins, what it's not is it's not whether or not they look like they're smiling. Bottlenose dolphins always look like they're smiling. And so you don't want to use that. However, their body language, how much energy they put into it, you'll come to learn their various different, there's something called jaw pop, which is an aggressive kind of signal. And so they have these different signals that tell us how they're feeling. What is the most exciting thing you have found out by working with dolphins? I'm not really sure how to disentangle exciting from fun. So the most fun one for me, I have to say, was the blindfolded imitation. And the reason was that, I'll tell you an inside story here. Do I have time? Yeah. The reason was when we came up with that study, we actually came up with it. We were talking about different things that we could do with eye cups. So for eye cups, what we'll often do to show guests to demonstrate echolocation, we'll put eye cups on a dolphin, we throw out a dive ring, they go get it, etc. So we were talking about, well, what else could we do with it? And we thought, well, I wonder, we know they can imitate, I wonder if they can imitate blindfolded. And our, my co-research director at the center went out and tried it, and she called me up and she said, hey, guess what, Tara can do it. At which point I had to say, wait, stop. We need to actually design a study around this. But like I said, he got it like that. And so that was a lot of fun. Let's see. Would dolphins need object inference? Experiment 1, if they could echolocate the object, for example, if it was moved in the bucket in the water. So it depends on whether or not the buckets that you use are acoustically opaque, by which I mean there are some substances, there are some substrates that dolphins can echolocate through, which is why there, say in the Bahamas, there are dolphins who will echolocate into the sand to find fish that are in the sand. So in that case, they don't need inference, they can just see. Dolphins can also see, oddly enough, scarily enough, inside our bodies in that same way, in the same way that you have ultrasound. Basically what they have is ultrasound, and so they can echolocate and see what's in our bodies. But there are some substances that are acoustically opaque, and so then presumably, even if it was in the water, they would need to infer rather than just to see it directly. All right, let's see what else. Back to the research, if you change the color and or shape of each container, could the dolphin track the alligator toy? That's a really good question. I don't think color would probably matter because as far as we can tell, dolphins don't have color vision, certainly in the same way that we do. But so I'm gonna tweak your question a little bit and say, if we had 3 different types of containers, could the dolphin track the alligator toy? My guess is going to be yes, but here's where it gets a little tricky. My guess is going to be yes, but using a different cognitive process. So I think they could learn really quickly. Let's say we had, different shapes. If it disappears into the sphere shape, then when I pick the sphere shape, I win. If it disappears into the triangle, then if I pick the triangle, then I win. And so I don't think you would necessarily need to track the object to do that. So if I did that study with you, for example, and I put it in a star-shaped container, and then I put a screen up and moved everything around, and I took the screen away, you could still figure out where it is. It's in the star-shaped container, even though you didn't track its movement. And so that's why we use identical containers. Let's see, I have more down here. What do you find the most challenging about working with dolphins? I find the most challenging thing is also the most exciting thing, which is always, how do you ask them the questions? How do you get the idea across to them that what it is you want them to do? We don't have a shared language. I could just explain the research to you. Hey, in this particular one, I want you to pick the object, the container that has the alligator in it. Or even better, in the one with the dots that we didn't talk a whole lot about, and I would say to you, I want you to pick the board with the fewer number of dots. How on earth do you get that idea across to the dolphin? And so fortunately, I have a wonderful research team at DRC, and so these are the kinds of things where we put our heads together and try to figure out what sort of apparatus do we need to build, what sort of training do we need to do, how do we walk the dolphins through learning the game without ever telling them what the answer is. Okay. What is the signal for baby, as in the experiment where you ask the dolphin to call back its calf? As far as the physical signal, it was exactly the same for go get the object, except she would say out loud, go get the baby. And the dolphins can recognize verbal cues as well. So it was just a verbal cue added to the physical cue that they already knew. So are there behavioral differences between the 3 types of obtained dolphins, wild caught, rescued, and born there? I think that would be an awesome study, an awesome question if we had enough examples to be able to tell. But here's what I can tell you, like I said at some point, dolphins have very different personalities, right? Dolphinalities. And so it's really hard to tell. We have, like I mentioned to you, we only have 1 dolphin that was born in the wild and they collected a long time ago. We've got 3 younger dolphins who were born in the wild and rescued from bad situations. But they also have really different personalities. And so it's hard to tell, and I don't know the answer to whether or not there are systematic differences between those. All right, and I'm thinking, I think my phone's being weird, that we are out of time. So thank you everybody for hanging out with me, and come see us.